postman, life as a teenager in 1966.
1966, the year England ruled the world. Not just in football, but in music and fashion too.
London is all shook up by a rock and roll fashion show of the latest Carnaby Street gear. The clothes are with it, and the buyers don't want to be left without it.
From the Beatles and Rolling Stones to Mary Quant and the Mini, the 60s were in full swing. But I was too young to join the party.
I was just turning 2 years old in 1966, so I was blissfully ignorant of all the excitement that was going on around me at the time. But years later, I started to appreciate what the revolutions of 50 years ago had done to help shape my own life, from being a music-mad teenager in a tiny little Essex village to then becoming a journalist and a radio DJ. This is my chance to go back and find out what all the fuss was about.
I want to know how the year felt if you were growing up in my part of the world, in Essex and the rest of East Anglia. I'll meet people who were teenagers back then and discover a treasure trove of home movies, photos, diaries and gadgets, precious mementos of an extraordinary year.
You got all that newfound freedom and it's just exploration, discovery and going out and having adventures and good time.
Yeah. We're often told it was a golden age to be young. But did the good vibrations of 66 reach the east of England too? Here we are in Harwich on the east coast. It's where the A120 comes down to meet the sea. I suppose it's always been slightly on the edge of things. It is out of the way unless you're going to Holland by ferry. But for a small time in the mid-60s, this place was the heart, the centre of a cultural revolution. On a club, all of the guys call her flamingo. They called it pirate radio, a fresh-faced alternative to the straight-laced BBC, which only played pop for a couple of hours each day. This home movie footage was filmed in the mid-60s by one of the original Buccaneers, Keith Skews. Mr. Skews,
well,
pleasure to meet you.
Say?
Pleasure to meet
Steve,
you.
welcome on board.
Thank you very much. They weren't licensed by the government, but the pirates dodged the law by mooring up a few miles out to sea in international waters. That meant a perilous journey to work.
You would come out on a tender, and because we were literally 12, 14 miles from Harwich, the tender would come alongside, and then you were literally thrown aboard. It was very dangerous.
All the original pirate ships are long gone, but this old lightship is a pretty good stand-in. They seek him here. Living conditions on board were as basic as the grub, and daily life was hardly rock and roll. But who needs home comforts when you're tearing up the rule book to make something new? Musically, how much do you think the Pirates helped change the course of, well, I suppose pop music during the 60s?
Well, very much, because we were playing pop music 24 hours a day, whereas the BBC would have maybe 2 or 3 programmes where they'd play pop music, and the teenagers wanted the particular kind of music. Young housewives weren't being looked after really by the BBC, whereas pirate radio got through to that particular audience, which was huge. I mean, at times, 14 million listeners. Good gracious me, the BBC would have bitten your hand off to get an audience like that. The Pirates have a special place in my heart. They opened the door to a new style of music show, a door I later walked through when I joined Radio 1. Aside from the fact that I often get seasick, and that would be an obvious drawback, I think this would be a tremendous environment to live in. Imagine just being able to talk about pop music with some of your colleagues all day and then going on air. And at a time when there was so much tremendous pop music, being able to play the best of it to fans listening on transistor radios back on the mainland. Keith and his mates had fans across the UK. But if you lived close by, you could even take a trip to see them in the flesh. Tom and Charles were teenagers back then. They lived in Felixstowe, so the Pirates were virtually on their doorstep. So this was filmed in 1966?
It was, yes.
Right, let's see what we've got. This home movie is a unique record of a trip to see their heroes in action.
That's me, briefly. And that's Radio Caroline.
So this is your first trip out to actually see Radio Caroline?
This is the first time we went out on the Viking Saga, which is a pleasure boat that went from Clacton-on-Sea.
So how excited were you at this point, getting to see Caroline for the first time?
Very much so, because we were great big fans, and obviously we'd listened to them on the radio, heard the voices. When we got there, the DJs would come out on board, and then you'd see the faces. I mean, they did introduce themselves, because not everybody knew what they looked like.
It's strange, though, isn't it? Because it's almost like going to a circus or something. It's like a DJ zoo. Inspired by your trip out to see Caroline and the fact that you're both fans of Radio Caroline, you then decide to have a go at your own pirate radio station, is that right?
That's correct.
That's it, yes. We gathered together bits of gear, like tape recorders and a turntable.
Yeah.
And the transmitter. That's
Right.
the hard bit.
I was going to say, I mean, because how old were you at the time?
I was 14 and 15.
14 and 15. Where does a 14-year-old boy in Felixstowe get a transmitter from?
Army surplus.
So you set this up where?
In my bedroom. The studio was in what was basically
a converted cupboard,
a
wasn't
built-in
it?
cupboard, which we lined with egg boxes.
Oh, of course, got a soundproof.
Absolutely. And Tom built a springline echo unit, which was highly advanced for its day. We were able to put echo on our voices and sound just like the American DJs that we sometimes heard.
It's time for the Tom Sinclair Show.
How far do you think that signal went?
Well, how many 100 yards?
It wasn't
Our
big.
initial endeavours were a little bit short range, weren't they?
They were.
So while there's all these pirate radio DJs out on a ship 5 miles away on dry land in Trimley, there you are.
Yeah, that's
Trimley
right.
doesn't sound like it's the most rock and roll of places,
No,
if you don't mind
I
me
don't think
saying.
it was. We obviously had to compensate for that.
Rather than naming it after your own locale, what was it called?
Radio Walthamstow.
Now, the greatest sound since radio began. This is Radio Walthamstow.
Radio Walthamstow. And you were never tempted to call yourselves Radio Trimley?
No, we wouldn't do that because we...
I've been asking for trouble, didn't I?
Yes. This was our feeble attempt to confuse the authorities so they didn't know where to come and raid us.
Yes, a big hi and a howdy to the Tom Sinclair Show, coming to you from Radio Walthamstow, broadcasting on 49 fun-filled meters in the shortwave band.
But the good times couldn't last forever. By 1966, the pirates were entering choppy waters. In January, Radio Caroline had run aground in stormy seas at Frinton, but the real threat came from the government. And a dramatic crime in the summer gave them the perfect excuse to pull the plug on the pirates.
William Oliver Smedley has been charged with the murder of Reg Calvert, the head of Radio City, who was found dead in a house in Saffron Walden this morning.
I was on duty the day that actually happened, and my news bulletin led with that story. And I'd met Reg Calvert, and that incident, I thought, as soon as I read that item, that is the death knell to offshore radio.
Smedley had fallen out with Calvert over plans for a new pirate station. Although he was cleared of murder, the bad publicity allowed the government to portray the pirates as dangerous outlaws.
The government now have got that information which they wanted for a long time to nail us and blow us out of the water, basically.
A few months later, the great adventure ended with an Act of Parliament that banned the pirates for good.
As sad as it was and as final as it was, the work had almost been done, the blueprint that pirate radio gave us, getting on air and being able to express yourself, this all combined for radio for the forthcoming 40, 50 years.
It did. Radio 1 came, and Radio 1's still there after all these years.
And wouldn't have been there without the pirates.
That is very true.
And now you've gone away. Don't you see that now you've gone and I'm left here on my...
The radio pirates weren't the only people using technology to bring us the shock of the new. Kits like this may look retro now, but 50 years ago, it was this sort of gear that was bringing us new music, fashion, and ideas.
You don't have to say you love me
This impressive collection belongs to Rob Howard from Norwich.
Oh, my word. Now, look at this. This is an Aladdin's cave.
As a kid, he loved tinkering with kit like this. Now he restores it for a living.
Here's a place where we should start, because this would be, what, 50s?
50s, late 50s, early 60s, classic front room radio.
Yeah, made by Decca. And this would be obviously considered very stylish.
It would have been expensive, yeah. It wouldn't have been a cheap item to have. As I say, it was designed to live in the front room, not to be hidden away. Yeah. It was out, so they had to make it look something, and it certainly does.
This is when the family would congregate around a radio. Yeah. But then, obviously, as the 50s moves into the 60s, you have a point where either people are buying a second radio, or it's about young people wanting to have a radio in their bedroom, wanting to have something of their own.
Then you go with something like this, which is a transistor set. It's lightweight, it's got a handle on the top, it's designed to be carried around with a relatively small battery in it, put it in the car, take it on picnics, or you could take it wherever you needed to take it. And these would have been sort of £13, £14, which doesn't sound a lot today, but then was quite a lot of money. I mean, the average weekly wage was about £25, so you can see it's still quite a big purchase. Yeah. But of course, a good way of getting a transistor radio at the time was to buy a kit. People may remember Practical Wireless magazines. You could buy a kit of parts to build your own radio with easily half the price of what it would be to buy it off the shelf.
So radio is adapting to people's lifestyles as they change, I suppose, as well, isn't it?
Well, it has, yes. Then you move on to the smaller stuff, little tiny proper portable sets made by Philips.
This is so light in comparison.
Exactly.
And I imagine people are thinking, well, this is a miracle, because we've gone from this to this
in a
matter
relatively
of
short
years.
space of time, exactly.
And that was just the start. By 1966, Japanese manufacturers had joined the party, and portable music was here to stay.
This caught my eye. What is this?
Imagine getting that for Christmas.
Because this is very stylish immediately.
It's like a jewellery box.
Yeah.
It's some sort of fancy piece of kit in there.
And inside, oh my word.
Look at that little thing. And this was proper microelectronics of its day. It's actually got a really tiny loudspeaker built in there as well. We start seeing a lot of the Japanese stuff coming over at the mid-60s. And they miniaturised stuff. To say, this is like your best MP3 player comes fancy phone you could buy today. This is what everyone would have wanted.
So talking about portability, this is something I found rooting around in the back room in the workshop here. And this is a bit of kit which you may have found in 1966. Now, this is a radio with a record player. Just to explain, this is how it works. It looks like a toaster. You take your record, you drop it in like a piece of toast, press the start button, and cue the music.
For teenagers outside London, radio and TV were lifelines, a way to keep pace with the latest music and fashion. But the winds of change took longer to reach the east. 2 years after the miniskirt turned heads in London, it finally arrived in Norwich.
Frankly, very few women have legs that are worth showing.
Depends on your purpose in life, really. If you want to attract boys, fair enough. But if you're just an ordinary person, no.
You'd blush and look the other way, would you? No, I won't blush. I'll turn and have another look, tell you the truth.
It was tough to keep up with changing fashions if you were a teenager outside the big cities, but it didn't stop them from trying. Liz Woodcraft was 16 in 1966. She lived in Chelmsford and was a signed-up member of a new teenage tribe, the Mods. She'd have killed to get her hands on this stuff. They're all 1960s originals collected by vintage fashion dealer Dawn Crawford.
So here we are in our mock-up 1966 boutique. Dawn, there are some great examples of clothes from the time.
We've got this sort of 60s pleather Mac. Obviously, you could wear that on your scooter and the rain would run off.
Liz is looking rather jealously at some of these.
Yes, but of course what you have to remember is these are all lovely and brightly coloured. Look at this, that gorgeous purple. But for a mod girl, you really wore quite dull clothes.
The Mods, short for modernists, were one of the 1960s most recognisable tribes. They listened to American soul and R&B and dressed in sharp suits and low-key colours.
Look at this. Here, of course, you've got your dogtooth check. Lovely. Oh, there was a girl in Chelmsford who had a dogtooth check coat and we were so envious.
This one's a St Michael's, so it's Marks and Spencer's, and this is probably a bit more like you would have worn as a mod, with black and white and
If I
check
could have
with
afforded
contrast
it, I
colour.
probably wouldn't have been able to afford that. You know, this was a working class fashion. Even people who were at work were, you know, secretaries or builders. Nobody earned a lot, and I suppose that maybe that's the difference between being a mod in Chelmsford and being a mod, say, in London.
Liz still has her 1966 diary, a window on the world of a teenage Chelmsford mod.
So this is my entry for the 6th of January. In morning, went to London, bought a royal blue, long-sleeved, lacy knit jumper, 34 and 11, which was £1.25, and a maroon skirt, 15 shillings, which would have been, what, 75p. So, but, you know, that was a lot of money, because I think in my Saturday job, I was only earning about 15 shillings a day. So, you know, if you wanted to buy more than that, you'd have to work quite a lot.
So once you've got the clothes right, and obviously the look is right, but there are other things, doesn't there, which come with being a mod. I mean, just the way you move. I mean, even walking, you have to walk like a mod, don't you?
Oh, yeah, there was the Duke of Edinburgh walk, where it was for boys only, where you walked around town with your hands behind your back like that, you know.
Right,
That was very, very attractive. Yeah.
So you walk down the street like this?
Yeah, but in a
Sort of
more
like that?
relaxed way.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's hard to look relaxed, though, when you know what's coming next. Strictly speaking, dancing has never been my strong suit.
Right. Better give it some volume. And what do I do? So it's out. Yeah.
And then the left foot. So how simple, see, and that's what you would do. Sometimes you'd stand in a ring and do that, and you know, might do a little bit of this.
Oh, jazz hands.
Yeah.
Bit of jazz hands. Oops.
Keep your elbows in, and then when you've got a good rhythm,
Yeah.
you can just look round and see what's happening and who else is dancing. Because the other thing is the jive.
No, this is going to get more difficult now, isn't it?
Come on. So now
Okay.
then.
All right.
And always very tight. Follow my lead, I would like to say, but it's not very good. And then hands. And 1, 2, under, both together.
See, Liz, this is why I took up playing the records rather than dancing to them.
Liz is publishing a novel inspired by life as a Chelmsford mod. She's going to show me some of the places where the action happened 50 years ago.
But you're not doing
You
the
want
walk.
me to do the Prince Philip? All right, let's go and see what we can find. Not sure how long I can keep up the Prince Philip.
Like any self-respecting mod, Liz was hungry for new music. In an age before downloads, that meant a trip to Dace & Sons in the centre of town. The shop's relocated since then, but the old place is still remembered fondly in Liz's 1966 diary.
This is Saturday the 12th of March. Went up to Dace's to buy Lee Dorsey and Lou Christie. Waiting to hear them, Dave Temple and Chris Freya came along and said they'd play their records with us. So we did, and Lil ended up buying Lee Dorsey and the Graham Bond organisation, St James Infirmary. It's fantastic.
If they wanted live music instead, Liz and her mates would head round the corner to another vanished landmark, the Corn Exchange. These days, you don't get many top bands playing Chelmsford, but it was a different story in '66.
And as we get to this part of the town, because this is part of the town I know quite well, my dad works in the old town hall, but also just down, I think it is just around this corner, what is now the Evoke nightclub used to be the Chancellor Hall.
But of course, before that, just about here, was the Corn Exchange.
Oh, man, so this is the different generations
Exactly.
because the Chancellor Hall was where I saw my first ever gig, a band from West London called the Lurkers, and I somehow managed to persuade my mum and dad to let me go. In fact, they gave us a lift, dropped me off outside where there was a queue of, you know, some punk rockers in bin bags and stuff. But obviously that was the late 70s, so, but the 60s then, this would have been the place to come. How big was it?
Not huge, you know. I mean, not thousands of people, but you'd get a couple of hundred, I guess. And we would have Georgie Fame, David Bowie, The Who, The Hollies, the Animals, the Yardbirds, they all came.
For a place which is not known now for putting on live music, you wouldn't have
No.
Ed Sheeran playing here probably, but all those people played during the course of the 60s.
Exactly. I think a lot of people mourn the passing of the Corn Exchange. They just pulled it all down. I mean, it was the thing, wasn't it, at the end of the 60s, that's what happened. But when it was up and running, it was just such a great place to be.
It wasn't all rock and roll in '66. 50 years ago, he was a pop star too.
Fancy, at the age of 37, giving up a postal round you've done for 20 years to go into show business. It's certainly unusual.
Alan Smethurst was discovered by local BBC presenter Ralph Tuck.
Alan Smethurst staking his claim to be a Runton man.
And ended up signing for the same music publisher as the Beatles. For a few short weeks, the Singing Postman even outsold the Fab Four. Well, in Norfolk anyway. The Postman's biggest hit won an Ivor Novello Songwriting Prize in 1966. But the story behind the song begins a few years earlier, when Alan paid a visit to an old school friend.
Albert, my husband, and Alan went to the North Walsham Grammar School and started playing the guitar together. They used to sit in each other's bedrooms, I think, and learned a little bit more each time. He arrived on our doorstep, and I suppose I was introduced to him. He stayed for lunch, and he offered me a cigarette. He rolled his own, which was quite a performance. And then we walked on the Munsley shore because it was a lovely afternoon. And really, I didn't think any more about it.
Then one day she went away, I don't see her no more. Till by chance I see her down along the Munsley shore.
I was bathing my son, and I had the radio on, of course, and I heard Molly Windley, you know.
Molly Windley, she smokes like a chimney, but she's my little nicotine gal.
And I nearly dropped the poor little fella because I realised he meant he had written it about me.
Have you got a light, boy? Have you got a light?
I did ask him why he had called me Windley, and in his accent he said, "That's the only thing I could think of to rhyme with chimney."
Have you got a light?
I had a couple with him probably, or he had a couple with me, but I soon gave up when my son said that if you don't give up smoking, I shan't sit on your lap anymore. So, end of.
Actually, that's not quite the end of the story, because 50 years on, in the heart of rural Suffolk, the Singing Postman's music is still delivering. They have a sing-along once a month in this barn near Framlingham, and nothing goes down better than the most unlikely hit of 1966.
Molly Windley, she smokes like a chimney, but she's my little nicotine girl.
A lot of the energy of the 1960s came from the rise in youth culture and the tribes which it produced, and also, of course, the rivalry between those tribes. In fact, in 1964, in Southend and Clacton and here in Great Yarmouth, there were pitched battles between the mods and their rivals, the rockers. 2 years later, in 1966, the authorities were bracing themselves for more problems. And it may seem quiet today, but imagine the noise of the rockers arriving on their bikes from one end of town and the mods on their scooters arriving from the other. And on every corner, watching them closely, the police.
Among the crowds on the seafront that year was a Norwich teenager called Steve Streeter. He was a rocker back then. Together with his mates, he'd formed a biker gang, and they always headed to Yarmouth on a bank holiday. 50 years on, he's back to tell me what happened in 1966.
Now, are you feeling a little bit scared, a little bit apprehensive?
I am a bit, but let's go for it.
All right,
yeah.
Come on then, let's go in.
We've come to the Chalet Coffee Bar in Galston, a couple of miles from the Yarmouth seafront. In the 60s, this would have been off limits for a rocker like Steve. It was a mods hangout then, and by the look of it, nothing much has changed.
I brought you a rocker from Norwich. Come on, be on, Steve. I'll get you a coffee.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you must be Anne.
Yes.
Could I have 2 coffees?
2 coffees,
please?
yeah.
That would be absolutely lovely. So, you've been here since when? The 60s?
Yes. The place opened in 1960 and I married one of the owners in 63.
So you must know a lot of these lads.
Oh, yeah.
Are they well behaved generally?
Of course they are now.
How much has this place changed over the years?
We haven't sort of changed it a lot. No, there used to be metal things up because when they were younger, they used to climb all over the seats.
Now they're a bit older, they're not so flexible.
No.
Thanks, Anne. We got served, so that's the first thing. So imagine, I mean, we have some very nice gents behind us, but imagine if you were walking in here in 1966. What do you think the reaction to you would have been then?
If I was going to pass on my motorcycle, for example, and I see all the scooters, I don't think I would have come in anyway. But if I did, I would have come through that door, and I honestly think there was a hush.
We wouldn't have hit him, no. We weren't like that, no.
Talk us through a bank holiday then.
We'd have met down here.
Outside, the scooters would be right up the road.
And then we'd also, what we're going to do this afternoon, then they'd all go to Yarmouth.
I can remember one bank holiday in '66, the entire frontage was covered in mods.
The rockers would be at the pleasure beach.
Usually somebody would run backwards and forwards between the pleasure beach where the rockers were hanging out and the Britannia Pier where the mods were hanging out, and they'd be stirring up the old schoolboy thing like, whoa, the rockers are coming down here, it's going to be a fight. Then they'd run back like the mods are coming down there, and they'd get everybody to meet in the middle. Strangely enough, the press were in the middle and the police were there as well.
Do you think the rivalry was being accentuated by stories that just got more and more exaggerated?
The media was a bad boy on this. They certainly bumped everything up because it made good reading in the newspapers or on the television.
Local mods and rockers, we never had no trouble.
It must have been intimidating to other holidaymakers on the seafront with hundreds of us up and down there on scooters. I mean, if I was older, I wouldn't have liked it, to be quite honest.
Despite all the scare stories ahead of time, the 66 bank holiday passed by without any real trouble. And the Galston Chalet mods lived to tell the tale. I think, if I'm being honest, when we started making this programme, I was a little worried that, well, some of the big events of 1966, in fact, the whole fun and frolics of the swinging 60s, might have passed us by in East Anglia. But what we found, and what I should have known all along, is we're quite aware of fads and fashions and changes in technology. We just choose to adapt to them in a slightly idiosyncratic way. So we had a different breed of mods and rockers. We had a pop star who was a postman. But in a circuitous way, we did help change the course of rock and roll by enabling the Mavericks, the pirate radio DJs of the time, to play a whole new wave of bands and singers who would change the course of pop music history. And I think, for me, that's my favourite victory of 1966.
Next month, the BBC is staging a special event to recreate England's World Cup victory at Wembley 50 years to the day. Tune in to your BBC local radio station tomorrow to find out how you could be there.
Hello, I'm Tina Dahealy with your 90-second update. It was one of the worst terrorist attacks in British history. 21 people died in the Birmingham bombings more than 40 years ago. The IRA were believed responsible. Now a new inquest will look at the evidence. What would happen to immigration if we left the EU? Campaigners to leave say they want to introduce a new points-based system for migrants, but other countries are warning they'd adopt the same approach towards British workers. There are new hopes that the Egypt airplane, which disappeared last month with 66 people on board, might be found. A signal has been detected from one of the black boxes. Nearly 8,000 people were arrested for drug driving in England and Wales last year. New laws were brought in, giving police stronger powers to prosecute. And Prince Harry made a special delivery today. He presented an Invictus Games gold medal won by a US soldier to medical staff at a Cambridgeshire hospital who helped save her life.
Hello, I'm Alex Dolan. An extra 10,000 jobs will be created in the region's manufacturing sector if Britain retains its membership of the EU, but a Brexit vote could put them at risk. That was the message today from the Chancellor. Prince Harry has honoured the medical team from Papworth who saved the life of an American soldier. He presented them with Sergeant Elizabeth Marks's gold medal from the Invictus Games. And the weather. A damp and cloudy start, but becoming brighter later. Top temperature 16 Celsius.
Over 123,000 kids entered the Radio 2 Breakfast Show's story writing competition. 6 stories have emerged victorious, with the gold medals going to Evie Fowler and Ned Marshall.
What amazing stories will be told?
Watch highlights on the 500 Words website. Come on now!
Sneaky little...
My God!
Irishman.
That's quick. I can see Jordan and I can see LeBlanc. We could be on for an overtake here.
The brand new series of Top Gear continues Sunday at 8, only on BBC Two.
Every 2 minutes, someone in the UK is diagnosed with cancer.
When you're first diagnosed, you think, that's it, end of story, don't you?
But with survival rates on the rise...
My first reaction was, what's going to happen to the kids? And then I thought, why am I thinking that? Because I'm going to be here.
What's it really like to live with a disease?
She said she was having an after as well at one point.
It's not just about getting rid of cancer, it's about getting my life back to normal. Cancer is not the end. I'm 55, let's rock on.
The Big C in Me starts tonight at 9 on BBC One.